The music associated with Haruki Murakami is jazz music. Jazz appears in many of his works. Let's take a look at the scenes where jazz appears in Norwegian Wood. First, there is the scene where Toru spends Naoko's birthday in her room. After the last record I went back to the first. She had only 6 altogether. The cycle started with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and ended with Bill Evans's Waltz for Debbie. Naturally, jazz comes up a lot in the Jazz Cafe Doug scene. I kept quiet and listened to Thelonious Monk playing Honeysuckle Rose. Somewhere behind the sound of a sloshing shaker and clinking glasses and the scrape of an ice maker, Sarah Vaughan sang an old-fashioned love song. Jazz is also written in the scene where Toru writes a letter to Naoko. I sat at my desk to write my Sunday morning letter to Naoko, drinking coffee from a big cup and listening to old Miles Davis records. You can also find jazz in the written letter. About all I can do is put the record player on auto repeat and listen to Kind of Blue over and over while I watch the rain falling in the quadrangle. In some cases, the title of the novel itself is the name of a jazz number. South of the Border, West of the Sun comes from South of the Border, and After Dark comes from 5 Spots After Dark, the title of a jazz number. The style of the novel itself also seems to be influenced by jazz music. I learned 3 lessons from jazz and applied them to my novel. They are rhythm, harmony, and improvisation. When was Haruki Murakami's first encounter with jazz? My first encounter with jazz was in 1994, when I was 15 years old. In January of that year, Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers came to Kobe to perform. It was the first time I listened to jazz music properly, and I was struck by it like a lightning strike. And I thought, wow! I have never heard such amazing music in my life. From that moment on, I was completely hooked on jazz music. Before he became a novelist, Haruki Murakami was the owner of a jazz cafe. I worked and saved money, borrowed all kinds of money from relatives and friends, and opened a modest jazz club in Tokyo, in my mid-20s. It served coffee during the day, and became a bar at night. This job allowed me to listen to jazz music from morning till night. Even today, one of Haruki Murakami's hobbies is collecting jazz records. Some of his collection has been donated to the Haruki Murakami Library at Waseda University. He usually listens to them at home. My record collection is roughly 70% jazz, 17.5% classical music, and 12.5% rock music. In terms of jazz, I try to listen to newer music, of course, but I mainly listen to records from the 1950s and 1960s. Haruki Murakami gives the following advice to readers who are new to jazz music. You don't need to listen to a lot of albums in order to understand the appeal of jazz music. Just listen to one album that you like so thoroughly that you can memorize all the ad-libs and you'll be fine. Speaking of jazz, Miles Davis is the king of jazz music. Haruki Murakami says the following: if you were to ask me who I listen to most often, I think it would be Miles. It's Miles' records from the 50s and 60s. Miles was a musician who was always innovating himself. He never stayed in one place. He's a great guy. Regarding Miles Davis, Haruki Murakami mentions 2 albums. Of the Miles Davis albums, I like 4 and More, and Miles in the Sky. When asked what jazz albums he would recommend to readers who are new to jazz, he replied as follows: the coolest jazz album I've ever heard is Miles Davis' Walk-In. It's cool from head to tail. I still get a faint feeling of excitement when I see the word walk-in. When asked to name his favorite album by Bill Evans, a contemporary of Miles, he replied, "My personal favorite is a blues song he wrote called Interplay. It's on the album of the same title." However, there is another artist that Haruki Murakami likes the most. He professes in various places that I am a fan of Stan Getz. Stan Getz was a man with complicated emotional troubles, and his life was not exactly what you would call smooth and happy. But no matter how hard the real Stan Getz lived his life in the far north, his music never lost its magical grace, like the flap of an angel's wings. For me, in the end, Scott Fitzgerald was the novel, and Stan Getz was jazz music. So which Stan Getz albums does he like? My favorite Getz albums are his 2 live recordings at the Jazz Club, Storyville. Haruki Murakami's Portrait in Jazz, written with illustrator Makoto Wada, is a wonderful work for jazz fans. It introduces various jazz musicians and their favorite albums through Haruki Murakami's text and Makoto Wada's illustrations. Unfortunately, the English version does not seem to be available yet. I hope they will publish an English version as well.